as I said, and welcome to what is the opening event of the Greater Birmingham Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce's Commonwealth Opportunities Week. This is a series of online events that are taking place over the next 4 days, and they're all designed to help inform and support businesses who are looking to explore new opportunities for trade across the entire Commonwealth, really. If you haven't seen about any of the other events that we're running, culminating in our conference on Thursday, then we'll drop some details in the chat and you can pick those up as we go through the session today. But hopefully you'll look forward to participating in a few more events as well. I mean, I think it's fair to say that as a city region, Greater Birmingham has a ton of links with countries throughout the Commonwealth. I think we're often described as the Commonwealth city, you know, partly because of the diversity of our population here. And I think, you know, that's one of the reasons why we established the Commonwealth division of the Greater Birmingham Chambers a few years ago, to really try to make the most of those links and to drive bilateral trading opportunities for our businesses. I think it was also one of the reasons why we were awarded the 2022 Commonwealth Games. Back in December 2017 now is when we got the nod there. It seems unbelievable. But, you know, I think it's fair to say that, you know, while the past 12 months have been pretty trying by anyone's standards, you know, we can see spring is in the air. Recovery is just around the corner. We'll be hearing from the Prime Minister later in his roadmap. And for us here in Greater Birmingham, there's no doubt that a big focus, a big catalyst for our recovery is going to be the Commonwealth Games taking place in July and August next year. And so, you know, it's really, really exciting that we've got the games taking place here. And it felt fitting that we're going to open this week of Commonwealth opportunity activity with this session, which is all about winning at the games. How do our businesses win at the games in 18 months' time? So I'm going to shortly hand over to the president of the Commonwealth Chamber, Joel Blake, and I'm delighted that we're joined by 4 people who have some great knowledge of how you can win at the games. We've got Anne Ledgerwood, who's the General Manager of the St Enoch Centre in Glasgow and Chair of the City Centre Retail Association. So again, would have been linked into the successes that Glasgow saw back in 2014. Also joined by Peter Duthie, who's the Chief Exec of the SEC. I'm going to describe that, Peter, as Scotland's answer to the NEC group, but I'm sure you can put us right on that later. We've got, hopefully going to be joined by Stuart Patrick, who's my counterpart at the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. And then finally, Ian Reid, I'm sure is well known to many in the audience today. Ian's the Chief Exec of the Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games, but also spent a number of years in the build-up and during and after the 2014 Games in Glasgow in a number of different roles. So it's a great panel. The idea is to hear from all of them and then open it up to plenty of Q&A as well. So really hope you enjoy the session. Thank you to all of our colleagues for joining us. And Joel, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, and good morning to everyone who's online with us this morning. This is a great start event of a great week of opportunity for you in your businesses. So please do look at the other events that we're running this week and please do get involved. But I'd like to say a special thank you to our guest this morning. The Commonwealth Games is such a fantastic opportunity for the region and for the businesses therein. And it's about pre, during and post the Games, you know, the collective opportunity that the Games can provide, which is something that many businesses are, you know, dying to get involved in, and many have already made a lot of headway in that regard. But what we'd like to do is kind of go back to the experiences of 2014 and really start looking at how do you really start getting prepared for those opportunities that can come out of the Games. But then we also go to then look at the actual processes and examples of best practices, things to consider in order to get involved in the Games. And then we're going to be talking about the impact of the Games. What does it really mean for businesses? And along the way, I'm sure there are going to be people on the call who would like to get involved with questions. So please keep feeding them through. The team are picking those up and we'll bring those questions in as we're going through the conversation. So, but first, I'd like to start with yourself, Anne, because as Paul introduced yourself in terms of, you know, running such a fantastic organization where you are, you're chair of the Retail Association for the area. You've seen the impact of the Games in so many different guises. But what I'd like to ask you, I guess, first of all, is in terms of preparing and representing both yourself and the organization and your region through the games. What was that like?
Yeah, it was a fabulous experience, and I wish I was doing it all over again, like you guys have got that opportunity to do. Interestingly, when I was thinking about preparing for this session, I kind of came out with three phrases. One was, it will happen, accept it. So don't go against the tide. You know that this massive event is going to come to your city, and just accept it and enjoy it and what it's going to bring to you. It will create disruption, so plan for the disruption, understand that that will be there and plan so that you can minimize that. And it will create fabulous opportunities. So again, make sure you can maximize them and really look at what the opportunities are. From our point of view, it created a great partnership working across the city. Everyone really came together collaboratively, customer service initiatives, accessibility initiatives, later opening, really working on preparing and getting the logistics side of things right, came across as great partnership working as well. And then just that feeling of once you're in the games and the buzz that it creates in the city, the amount of people that are coming in, and the preparation then just allows you to enjoy that and really reap the benefits of it when it comes to you.
Well, I mean that's really fantastic. I want to deep dive a little bit into that, and in terms of the disruption piece, because as we know, over the last year and so many months, we've all been disrupted in many, many ways. And there are many businesses who are still trying to get back to an even keel, just be able to, continue to keep going. Yet they see the opportunity of the games just over the horizon. So in terms of disruption, what do you mean by disruption from your experiences? And how do you feel organizations could start to put in measures to manage that disruption? One, that they're going through now, but two, the disruptions that they might need to face in the way that you describe.
So on a really practical level, the key areas, the key disruption stroke logistic areas for us were the security side of things. Sure that everyone was aware of how to secure the property, contingency plans, counter-terrorism plans, suspicious packaging, training staff, training a lot of temporary staff who come in to deal with the additional footfall coming in, the additional sales coming in, bring in temporary staff, training them when they're training in a very different environment to what you're used to being in. So that security side was one area to really plan for. And the other side was the travel and transport side of things. So dedicated Commonwealth Games lanes, closures on the main days of the marathon, the cycle races, the time trials, road closures on those days, and trying to understand, can deliveries get in? Can cash and transit get in? Can your staff get in? Customers weren't really too much of an issue because the city collaboratively provided free public transport, and the customers were there and the footfall was there. So the customer side of it didn't come back as too much of an issue, but getting your staff in time, getting your deliveries in time. We had one fast food operator who, in the throes of this, and all of the food in the restaurants were doing amazing business, who had realised that they had a delivery of bread buns coming in and all the roads had closed at midnight and he couldn't get his delivery in. So just really, really digging deep on the practicalities of that, and just really getting your logistics right and making sure, have you done all of those? Have you looked at the contingency plans? From our point of view, the Get Ready Glasgow team and the website that they used and the various talks that they did, what I would say is if the city's doing that, then please businesses get involved in them, because you will get the practical guidelines. And as I say, it will happen. So go along with those frameworks and make the most of it for your business.
Thank you for that, Anne. I think that's a really important point. And I'd like to maybe come to you, Ian, in terms of just following on from that disruption point, because there's the business opportunities is one thing, and that's something I will ask you about shortly. But I think just following on from what Anne said there's the opportunity for change for the whole city. And from an entrepreneurial perspective, I would almost argue that the disruption is an opportunity for the city itself, the region itself, to kind of almost change the way it's working, making things more efficient, transport, logistics, etc. Well, from your point of view, in terms of leading the team all around this opportunity, how are you going to do the best that you can to support all businesses who are wanting to get the best of these opportunities?
Yeah, thanks, Joel. And I think Anne's highlighted a number of areas that are crucially important and will apply as much to Birmingham as they did to Glasgow. And I think the communications plan is really at the centre of all of that, because Anne's rightly highlighted that right now we're still in the planning phase of where marathons go, road race routes go, how the city's going to operate. And there'll come a point, probably 6 months or so before the event, where everybody needs to understand that, and it has a direct impact on the logistical rollout of the event and how businesses can continue to operate. But those hopefully short-term challenges, as Anne's rightly said, lead to huge opportunities. So the message to every business to take the time, engage. There will be a significant business engagement programme. So yes, do get involved in that so you can maximise the revenue opportunity, and think about the licensing and the staff points again that Anne's made around how you can make sure that you're ready for what should be a huge upturn in business. And of course, the Games brings a massive amount of opportunities for people to get involved as well, and that can be challenging for businesses. You know, there'll be undoubtedly staff coming into businesses asking if they can get time off to volunteer, asking if they can go and watch the Games, and getting that balance right as well is always challenging in an environment where there will be huge competition for labour. You know, there's going to be a huge appetite for labour from the Games specifically itself, in terms of catering, cleaning, logistics, security staff. But of course, every bar and restaurant may require some of those people as well. So working together in a partnership, as Anne says, is critical to all of that. But you know, one of the huge benefits of having the Games, and more so right now, as you rightly introduced, Joel, is that all these opportunities are coming in a time when we need them more so than ever. So like previous Commonwealth Games, we've got significant targets in terms of making sure that the specific Games contracts go to local businesses, or if they don't, there is a significant incentive to make sure the supply chain utilises local businesses and local employment or apprenticeships or whatever else. And so far, actually, that's going pretty well. Obviously, in terms of delivering a Games, it affects some sectors more than others. But actually, the general upturn at Games time for the whole service sector should be significant. And then, as you rightly introduced, how does the city and the region and others work together to make sure that the big bounce that should come from the Games, and I'm sure we'll come on to legacy, i.e., you know, the global perception of the city and the region is maximised, and the tourist industry is ready for that, the marketing campaign that goes around the Games, and hopefully attracting further businesses to invest into the city and the region. Everything is put in place to make sure that that's maximised. So that's a piece of work that still needs to happen, but the right people are involved in thinking all of that through.
Fantastic. I mean, you know, in this early part of the conversation that we're having this morning, I think what businesses who are on the call need to really, really understand is that it's not as simple as just applying for an opportunity and you will get it. It's not as simple as just shouting the loudest and expecting to be heard. There's a lot of networks, there's a lot of engagement, there's a lot of models of engagement that they can get involved in from now. They can certainly bring their voice to the table and be really championing the support of other businesses too within their sector and their spaces. But it's very clear that there's a deeper understanding of the whole opportunity that's needed from the business community. Peter, I'm going to come to you shortly in terms of some of your impacts that you got from being involved in that, but I would like to quickly go to Stuart because, and welcome Stuart, thank you for joining this morning. I'd like to come to you, Stuart, because I think as part of this preparation for businesses, it's clear that chambers have a huge role to play in terms of helping to communicate these opportunities to their members, to the wider business community, lobbying on behalf of their organisations, etc. So what was the role of the chamber where you were during this time, and what were some of the lessons or learnings that you could maybe share with the businesses who want to get more involved?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, and apologies I was a little late there with my a couple of technical problems, but anyway, I'm now here. Well, a few thoughts really on where the chamber played its role. One was in the early stages of preparing the business community for the opportunities. So we actively prepared events for explaining how you would access the contracts that might be available, we were supporting the rolling out of the Games portal, which has subsequently become a feature of all public sector procurement in the city afterwards, a bit of a legacy actually from the Games. But also a lot of pre-training for preparatory training, really, for businesses to understand how to make pitches through the portal for particular contracts, and all within the rules, all within the state aid rules at the time. So no bending of the rules whatsoever, but the extent to which we were able to give extra assistance to companies to understand how to utilise the process or to exploit the process as well, inevitably led to a much higher percentage of local businesses securing contracts than would otherwise be the case. We were particularly alert to the fact that the Australians were they're really good at going around all the like the circus of international events to get access through the procurement processes. So we had to be pretty sharp to make sure that local companies were as good and as competitive as some of the international competition. I would also say that the extent to which we lobbied for the activation of the city centre, I'm not sure about the practicalities in Birmingham, but certainly in Glasgow, the extent to which the Games actually happened in the city centre was going to be relatively limited. All the venues are spread around outside of the city centre. So the fact that so much was done in the city centre to provide active attractions, the use of central squares, the use of markets, etc., in order to give the city centre a real sense of what the Games were bringing. That was one of the most impactful issues for the business community, beyond even the winning of specific business. The sense that their city had been brought back to life, or brought to life in such a fantastic way, and that everyone could share, or so many businesses could share in the outcomes of the Games at the time, was really important. A couple of other things which I'll mention at this stage. I don't think we exploited the international trade opportunities as much as we could have done. I think some businesses benefited partially through winning contracts, and then being prepared potentially to join the international circus that is major events. If you can crack it and get into that circus, there's one or two companies in Glasgow that are regular bidders for international events, like a Greco in temporary power generation, or Bar and Ray in swimming pool development. Those are companies that have been going in the major event circuit for years, and equally had their role to play in the Commonwealth Games. But to be able to get one or two other companies to get into or get to the level that's necessary to make regular bids into major events was something we did pay a bit of attention to alongside the national agencies. So I can think of a couple of companies that use the Commonwealth Games as a platform to being able to apply to other major events. And I suppose fundamentally the Chamber of Commerce's role in that was to work alongside the agencies, the national agencies, to identify the companies that would really benefit from close support, close developmental support. I think where we probably could have done more, and this is a feature of the times, was in making international connections for investment. I don't think we've really exploited that to the fullest. Part of the reason for that, of course, is that the Commonwealth is so geographically spread. So the markets that the Commonwealth represents tend to be relatively low export markets. Well, they were at the time. Of course, we hadn't had Brexit in 2014, so the European markets dominated then, they still dominate now, and of course aren't a particular feature of the Games. So the Australians, the Canadians, the Indians, that's one that I think I would wish we had done more. We did a great deal with the Jamaicans, but there were specific reasons for that, otherwise known as Usain Bolt at that time. So we just didn't do enough really in trying to reach out. I think at this time, given what's since happened, that I would say a Chamber of Commerce, especially given that the Chambers of Commerce now have much more developed international connections 8 years on than we had. I think that that's an opportunity that Birmingham shouldn't miss.
Fantastic, Drew, and thank you for and you've mentioned a number of different things there, and I will come back to all these points. But what I just wanted to do is to really set the scene of all four of you first. But that piece around FDI and the use of inclusion and diversity within the engagement process, I think, is really quite important. So I will come back to some of that in a little bit later. But I want to come back to you, Peter, now yourself. So in terms of the actual impact from the games as a business. So in terms of your journey in the games, how did that go for you, and what were some of the benefits? And also, I would say maybe some of the challenges for our businesses who are on the call to bear in mind.
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me this morning. The Games was a really important event for us for several reasons, which I'll expand on in a moment. But just slightly to set the scene, I guess, many of you may not be familiar with the SEC or the Scottish Event Campus, to give it its full name. But our business is very similar to the NEC in concept. We opened in 1985. We've got 3 main venues, all on one site, effectively in the heart of the city. The original SEC Centre, which houses exhibition halls and conference breakout facilities. The SEC Armadillo, which is a 3,000-seat conference centre and theatre, which was added in 1997. And the SSE Hydro, a 14,000 capacity arena, which opened in 2013, the year before the Games. We'd obviously been involved with the Games long before 2014, and I think you've mentioned planning beforehand. The preparation is absolutely crucial. We were involved as the bid was being prepared, and then through detailed planning leading up to the event. And during the Games, we were the largest precinct, hosting 6 sports. We had gymnastics, boxing, judo, netball, wrestling, and weightlifting all on the site, and also the International Broadcast Centre and main press centre. So we welcomed over 200,000 visitors over 11 days and provided the backdrop for the BBC studio, which they'd built on the other side of the river for the duration of the Games, which gave us great exposure. It was 11 days of electric atmosphere, and the tangible excitement produced an incredible success for Glasgow, an amazing result for Team Scotland and the athletes, and a formidable legacy for our campus. I guess, so in terms of the legacy, firstly, financially, it was good for us. What's not to like when someone wants to book your entire complex for a couple of months during the quieter part of the year? I'm sure Ian will be familiar with some of those conversations. But even more importantly, we were able to demonstrate to a significant audience our capabilities as a venue, our location, our appeal, and our flexibility, and the strength and professionalism of our team with a sort of friendly can-do attitude. And what I must say here is that the Commonwealth Games is run by an extremely capable and experienced group of people. They brought a huge amount to that party, and a healthy mutual respect, I think, developed during the extensive planning for the Games, which contributed to the slick operation of the event. I can honestly say that there wasn't a single operational issue of note that arose at the SEC during the full period of the Games, which is a testimony to all involved. It was a great learning and confidence building experience for our team, but I think also a lot of the Games team learned a lot as well, but brought a huge amount of professionalism and experience there. And as Stuart touched on, there seems to be a lot of Australians around in that area as well. They seem to have captured the market in terms of delivering some of these major international games. So our reputation and that of Glasgow received a real boost, and we know that translated into future success and being a key factor in securing some major conferences for the city. The demonstration of our capability to stage a large complex event gave organisers confidence to invest in the city. And that would include the World Climate Change Conference, COP26, which is happening on our campus in November this year. So one aspect maybe worth touching on, Joe, which I got involved in leading up to the Games for a number of reasons, was of sponsorship. And to be honest, for some time, there was a high degree of scepticism in Glasgow about the Games, and the sponsorship programme was correspondingly slow. I think, you know, odd disparaging references to the school sports, I think people didn't necessarily understand the calibre of athletes that participates in the Commonwealth Games and how important it actually is. But all of that sort of changed a bit with the success of the London Olympics. I think once the interest had been sparked and people understood, you know, how important these games actually are, things picked up very quickly. And in addition, the people of Glasgow thought that if the games makers could make London welcoming, what on earth would a Glasgow welcome look like? The volunteer programme was a huge success. The Clydesiders, as they were known, personified the way the whole city embraced the Games. And with the sponsor programme exceeding the targets set, nearly 50 organisations being instrumental to the success of the Games. Those sponsors created memorable campaigns and delivered valuable services to the organising committee. For example, AG Bar, who opened their Vibrant and Brews store in the Merchant City and introduced 3 commemorative Commonwealth Games and brew cans in the lead up to the Games. Over 3,000 athletes, officials and Games family members from 33 nations and territories travelled to or from the Games on an Emirates service. And over 1,000 Ford branded vehicles were provided to support transportation, while Glasgow-based company Trespass provided all the uniforms for the employees in the Clydesiders. And whilst these were bigger deals involving larger companies, many others get involved in smaller ways. For example, some of the athletes were at the centre of sponsor campaigns with support offered to home nation athletes on their journey to the Games. So picking an individual athlete who may have a connection to your business or relevance can create a level of awareness and also be a way of engaging and supporting the Games. Sponsors also helped actually in the vibrancy and dressing of the city, which Anne talked about in the lead up to and during the Games, and also with the provision of some of the services to the Games, such as legal and financial and recruitment services. All of those on a sort of partnership basis rather than just supply. So the Games engage with a wide range of brands from all around Scotland, the UK, and indeed worldwide. And all of this contributed to what was hailed as the best Games ever at the time. So that's the bar for Birmingham to step up to, and I'm sure they're more than capable of rising to that challenge. And at this point, just in case I don't get a chance later, I wish Ian and his team and the whole of Birmingham every success for the Games. So as well as supply opportunities with the Games, it's worth considering if sponsorship presents a chance for sort of wider involvement, and that link between procurement and potentially activation opportunities, I think, is an important consideration.
Fantastic. Peter, thank you for that. You've given a really good comprehensive view of some of those great opportunities there and some of the impacts that have been created both for your business, but also for the wider business community. What I like to do is just take the time just to kind of feed in a couple of questions that have come through. But before I do that, I just wanted to set the scene for the second half of this conversation, because what you've all done really, really well is just really paint a really great picture of the preparation, the process and the impact of the Games based on 2014. But I think I want to go a little bit deeper in terms of the practicalities and advice for businesses with our current Games coming into the Birmingham region, and some of the kind of practical challenges, frustrations, ideas that businesses are having and sharing. And again, just your experiences of what you've all gone through, if you could maybe help to answer some of those questions for those businesses. But I will come to a couple of the questions that are in the Q&A so far, and I implore those who are on the call to keep bringing the questions through. So let's have a look here. I mean, one of the questions, maybe Ian, I'll come to you with this one, is will Birmingham be using a similar portal for procurement like Glasgow used? Something similar to Compete For, maybe with HS2 and other organisations?
Yeah, Joel, it's up and live, and we've been using it probably for the last 18 months to 2 years. So probably the easiest way to access it is actually if you just go onto the Birmingham 2022 website, which is just birmingham2022.com. There's a kind of business section in there, and you can click through and it take you right through to the business portal. So really easy to use, one of those systems similar to HS2 and the Olympics and others, where you can register your business once, tick the sectors that interest you, and the system will proactively notify you when any opportunities come up. So yeah, that's there, and as I say, through the website is probably the easiest way to get there.
Brilliant, thank you for sharing that, Ian. Another question, again, maybe to you again, Ian, actually, could you give details, or is there a link to what contracts have already been issued? So these companies could be approached to see if they've got any supplier vacancies, supply chain opportunities, job vacancies, etc. Because it's very clear that for some of the smaller businesses, they want to be part of the Games, but may not have the capacity to apply for the larger contracts. So I think this question is really about how do I get involved with those who have been given those contracts?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I've just taken a note to maybe work with the chambers perhaps and others about how we make that more widely available. Certainly, because we follow a public sector procurement model, Joe, we are obliged to publish an award notice effectively. So it will be in the public arena who's been successful in most of these contracts. What we probably haven't got right now is a single space where all of that's pulled together, and it's actually a good idea. So So yeah, that's one we'll follow up on and make that more widely available.
Fantastic, fantastic, brilliant. So keep the questions coming through, those who are on the call, and we'll move forward into the kind of second half of today's session. So, you know, we've talked about preparation, we've talked about logistics, processes, understanding how to get engaged. We've talked about the impacts, we've talked about opportunities, missed or otherwise. But I think one of the big things that are coming out from businesses right now, I guess, is the legacy of the games. What does that really mean for all of us now as those involved in the ecosystem to support the games itself? And so one of the key questions coming back is that community engagement piece. You know, how do you make sure that the benefit of the games really trickles down into all communities? And I don't mean that from a diversity and inclusion point of view, that's very important, but all communities, whether it's smaller businesses, social enterprises, third sector organizations, diversity and inclusion, young people, the next generation, how do you make sure that these opportunities really filter down? So in terms of experiences from 2014, but also thoughts around 2022, how do we make sure that there's a real reduced gap between these opportunities and the communities that we're all here to serve? So anyone got just any thoughts on that?
Sure, I'm happy to pick that up, Joe. I think one of the benefits that Glasgow had, it was been mentioned earlier, it's around communication, and the earlier that communication gets carried out, the better. Glasgow had a campaign called Get Ready Glasgow, which was around informing as many people as possible as to what was happening, what the restrictions would be, but also what the opportunities were. And the earlier that happens, the earlier the opportunities present themselves. And I think it comes back to that, gives people time to prepare for those opportunities to take advantage of them. So for brands' engagement with the games, the earlier they engage with the games, the longer the benefit they get, because the games happens in a finite point in time. So during the build-up and during that whole communication process, you have an opportunity to get your brand or your business in front of people's minds and front and center. So I think
but practically, but Peter, sorry to cut you, but I was just thinking, about practically, if you're a small business, how do you get involved in that communication process? Because often, you know, some of the feedback from some businesses being that, you know, they maybe not be connected to the mainstream places where these opportunities might be promoted, or if they are, sometimes it's too much jargon or they're not sure how to. So what would be your advice on how best to engage with these communication opportunities?
I think it's about thinking creatively, and it's about understanding what it is you want to contribute, or you feel you can contribute, and trying to see where that fits with the bigger picture of the games. As I said, a couple of examples I gave earlier was Trespass Clothing, for example, provided all the clothing for the volunteers. So that was a simple example. Other requirements of the games that your business can step in and provide additional value. It may not be through the main core procurement, but there may be added value that can be produced or provided on top of that.
Fantastic. And I guess linked to one of the questions that have come through, can I come to you, Anne, with a similar question? Because you know, large organizations like yourselves who can maybe provide events, networking opportunities, engagement in that way, were there examples of you doing that with 2014, or indeed, have you got any advice and guidance how other organizations could help businesses to engage through things like networking events, etc., through their own networks?
Yeah, I think what's going through my head when we're talking here is that there's the direct involvement with the games, and you know, both Ian and Peter have talked about the sponsorship opportunities and the branding associated with the games. And one of the frustrations that some of the smaller businesses had was they weren't quite in that circuit. Yep. So they weren't necessarily in the major sponsorship opportunities. You know, the Commonwealth Games organisation, and that it's fairly strict in terms of how those rules work. So there was a little bit of frustration from the smaller businesses in that. I think through opportunities collaborating with the City Centre Retail Association, Chamber of Commerce, as Stuart said, played a major part in that, in terms of businesses getting involved who maybe wouldn't have fed directly into that large level sponsorship, but could get involved in the footfall opportunities, the city centre activations, you know, creating much smaller activity and presence. There was festivals on around the city at the time as well that weren't necessarily immediate Commonwealth Games activities, but it was all creating that buzz in and around the city. And I think, again, it's back to that collaboration, the communication, start building up the networks now with people. Don't sit there and just be frustrated because you can't be in as a major sponsor, but actually start speaking and through the Chamber of Commerce, through your various business groups, really start building up your contacts to see what you can do in that regard.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Thank you, Anne. I think that's really, really important. Every business at different stages. So if you're not eligible for whatever reason to get those larger opportunities, there is a still ripple effect that you can be a part of. And it's making sure that you take the time to do the research, go onto kind of the Commonwealth Games websites, look at the portals, sign up to newsletters, just be part of that network and to get the information. And I suppose, Stuart, with yourself from the Chamber perspective, again, a similar question as an organisation, were there events that you were maybe putting on and were involving businesses in during the time? Or indeed, what advice and guidance would you give to businesses who want to be part of that communication line into the Games and be part of that network?
Yes, well, we did. We ran what we call the Glasgow Business Embassy all the way through the Games and occupied a city council facility in the heart of the city to put on events virtually every day, including the weekends, to welcome businesses in who weren't necessarily involved in direct delivery, but wanted to feel as if they were part of the whole agenda. I think the point about the branding is an important one. Individual companies were constantly getting their knuckles rapped for using the Commonwealth brand when they weren't allowed, but a supporting brand was developed so that companies could demonstrate their support and commitment to the Games. I mean, it's not a particularly dramatic thing, but it was an extra, I thought, a helpful extra that allowed companies to demonstrate that they were supportive of the Games. So it was a brand that was specially designed for businesses to do that. I actually would also say that there were a variety of other organizations that were in positions to help companies to get involved or to feel they were part of it. So if I was in the East End of the city in Glasgow, for example, I sit on the board of the Clyde Gateway Urban Regeneration Company, and so many of the venues are in the East End of the city. So the very fact of that Urban Regeneration Company's existence helped to make the connection between the Games and the East End, which is a traditionally challenged part of the city, an old industrial part of the city that has long been going through regeneration. And that vehicle helped enormously to make the connections for local businesses into the whole experience of the Games. It was also helpful that the Commonwealth Games organisers were very engaged in the events programming that we were putting on to help activate business interests. So, senior officials would come along to events to meet up with the business community. And we were lucky enough to get a bunch of tickets as well to be able to take businesses along to Games events. So all of these things added up to a sense that folks were part of it, even if they couldn't see the direct business benefit of that at that time. And I think Anne's point is a really crucial one about the cultural festival that was going on alongside the Games, so that a huge programming of arts events, community events, which businesses could support and supply and become involved in as well in the major parks and some of the major city facilities. So the city's ability to turn the Games into a much wider festival, not just an international sporting festival, I think made a difference for businesses too.
I think just related to that, Joe, for me, one of the biggest surprises for me in some senses was the level of footfall of people walking around the city. A lot of wayfinding had been put in place to allow that to happen, but the sort of festival style activity encouraged people to stay in the city, encouraged people to walk around the city. We were helped by great weather, but I was surprised at how many people were walking around. So that in itself presents an opportunity perhaps for businesses on the ground to take advantage. How can they best then take advantage of that increased footfall and people arriving at Games, generally speaking, prepared to walk around. because of the communication that had gone out ahead of time about methods of transport, what to expect, and to be prepared to walk. So they were dressed for it, they're carrying backpacks, that and were prepared and very engaged with the whole city. And the program the city put on, I think, really came together with that component of a lot of people walking around.
Fantastic. Well, just while I just sum up this kind of part here in terms of communication, I think what I'm hearing very clearly is that it's about being proactive and it's about being creative. There is no kind of one way in to be part of that communication network around the games. There are multiple ways. There are multiple ways in which organizations can come together and think creatively as partnerships to be able to bring a bit more kind of if you like, kind of weight and volume to what they're trying to do with their ideas, bringing these different ideas together. And your point there, Peter, about the footfall and understanding that there are audiences around the audience of the games, if that makes sense. So the footfall itself is an audience in itself. So how are you using opportunities to engage with those individuals who are being part of the games itself as that audience? So I think for those businesses on the call today, it is about being as creative and out the box as possible, but also plugging your creativity into those formal channels. And the greatest start at the moment is the Commonwealth Games website. I know that is in the chat there, but for those who might not have seen it, it's www.birmingham2022.com/business. That's a great starting point to understand how you can get involved in tendering, how you can get involved in opportunities, and start to be part of that network of the games itself. Just want to round up this element around communication, just with a couple more questions that have come through. Great to see West Midlands Growth Company, who've just stated that they will be managing business sponsorship engagement. So look out for any news of this too from them. So again, another organisation in the region to be part of that network to keep yourself abreast of those opportunities. Couple of individual questions, which are specific to people's businesses, but I think the general trend coming through is just how do we get engaged? And as you quite rightly said, be part of the networks, be creative, make sure you're out there understanding what's happening. Like any other business opportunity, you'd go out there, you'd do the research, so do the research from that perspective. The opportunities are there, but it's making sure you're part of that. There's a specific question regarding technology businesses. So how do technology businesses benefit from the Glasgow Games? Is there any kind of general answer to that from the panel? So how do technology businesses benefit from the Glasgow Games? A very interesting question, given that there's a rise of technology within our region. So I think, and in terms of the technology sector and its growth. So just any responses to that?
All right. Sorry, just I'll let Ian go first.
So, sorry, Stuart, we might even have been about to say the same thing. So it's actually a really good question in terms of a real legacy from Glasgow. There were 2 or 3 technology companies who get involved in the games in Glasgow who probably used the games as their kind of foothold to really launch an events business. And actually, strangely, they're actually on our supplier panel as well. And the great thing in terms of a Glasgow and Birmingham link up, those 2 or 3 businesses have now grown nationally and have quite a significant West Midlands footprint. West Midlands offices, in one case amalgamated with local businesses here, recruited locally. So it's a great story in terms of a couple of those where they've started their events journey, they've used the games to really profile and promote their business, grown nationally and globally actually, and done some great work all around the world in events. And which has led to, as I say, to a local benefit here in the West Midlands. So there are a number of those organisations. And just the other point to make in relation to those, Joel, is in a couple of instances, they've actually teamed up with local technology businesses here to make sure that there's a local benefit, local employment, and a local knowledge as well. So another good example of kind of joint ventures that have almost come about because of the games.
Brilliant. No, thank you for that, Ian. Stuart?
Oh, well, Ian has said it, but I'll name one of the companies so you can go and have a wee look at them as a case study. Ian can't, but I can. Company called NVT. Have a look at that. Have a look at their website and see what you can see from them about how they exploited the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. I think they'd be a very good example.
Fantastic, brilliant. Well, thank you all for that. I want to kind of move on to another subject area, which you mentioned earlier, Stuart, in terms of international trade. And that kind of investment back into the region, or maybe even opportunities out of the region. Would you want to just go a little bit slightly deeper into what you were saying earlier regarding that? Because I think it's very clear that the Commonwealth Games offers a really fantastic opportunity for foreign direct investment into our region. And the tourism trade, the travel trade is going to benefit immensely from that, and which is, you know, such a great opportunity given the almost decimation of some of those spaces to date with what's gone on with the global pandemic. But do you want to just maybe go into a little bit more detail from your view on that kind of international trade piece that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I would probably separate international trade from foreign direct investment. I'd say that I would treat them differently. I think we actually have benefited in legacy terms in foreign direct investment, primarily because the city can demonstrates just how capable it is in delivering a major event like a Commonwealth Games. That has an impact on FDI investors' perceptions of what your city is able to deliver. If you can deliver a very effective event of that scale, then there's more trust about what you can deliver as a city that's relevant to that foreign direct investment. There's no doubt, for example, in terms of legacy and FDI, Peter mentioned it earlier, the fact that we delivered the Commonwealth Games and have the facilities that allow us to deliver COP26. COP26 is a massive opportunity for us to make connections with international corporates that will be sending their, well, we hope, depending on how the whole coronavirus develops by November, but that we'll see face-to-face a whole host of international corporate management teams appearing in the city that we'll be able to snaffle for an opportunity to say, meet your host city and see what it's all about. But that's an indirect benefit from what comes from being able to deliver something like the Commonwealth Games. International trade is just that much more, has been that much more tricky because, as I said at the outset, that our trading relationships with the Commonwealth countries or at that time in 2014 was markedly lower than it would have been with European countries. It still is, of course, but the drive to make connections with Commonwealth countries is now so much more extensive. And I would be saying to the Birmingham chambers that the opportunity to use the British Chambers of Commerce overseas offices in Commonwealth countries should be something that's been set up well in advance, so that you've got the ability to pitch the Commonwealth Games as an event into those markets, so that export opportunities, whether that's virtual trade missions or real trade missions happening at the time. I'm sure at the time that you hold the games, it will be real trade missions. See if those can't be set up for during the games, because I know the hotels issues will be an issue, but if you can solve that, get them across, because we didn't do enough on that. We really didn't. And it's an opportunity that you shouldn't miss.
Absolutely, and it would be remiss of me to not state the fact that as the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce, that's certainly an area that we're immediately been working on. In fact, 18 months previous, we looked at that as a real great opportunity to, you know, re-establish some great support for our businesses, but also making sure that the legacy of the Games continues that, particularly through virtual trade missions. You know, we've got a real push on diverse digital inclusion, diversity and inclusion, making sure that we can bring in a much more inclusive business growth opportunity for bilateral trade. But you're absolutely right. I think international trade is going to be so important. And I think businesses, again, on the call and in wider networks, it's understanding the opportunities that are available in those other countries from now, and building those connections and networks in a similar way that Anne mentioned earlier, with some of the wider creative thinking around engagement and networking. It's so crucial right now to really start and hammer that forward. And I'm sure, Ian, you're seeing maybe some of that locally here as well.
Yeah, I was just going to flag, Joel, as well. It's maybe not been mentioned yet, but I think the feedback from Stuart's been really helpful there, and it was noticed in terms of the focus that's been put on that side of things in relation to international trade through the Trade, Tourism and Investment Programme that's been set up here. So I know see Nicola from the growth companies on the call as well, because this is probably the biggest trade programme that will ever been set up alongside a Commonwealth Games. The government's invested well over £20 million. There's funding coming in from the combined authority and the private sector as well. So the resources are there. There's now a detailed business plan that's been put in place, and I think the engagement with businesses will start to happen, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of work alongside the Chamber as well, Joel, in doing that. But I think there is a huge desire, and it's not a surprise that one of the reasons the UK bid for these Commonwealth Games was a post-Brexit business environment and the real need to re-establish some of those trade links with the Commonwealth. So I think we will see perhaps more of that activity than there's ever been before at Commonwealth Games around Birmingham.
Yeah, absolutely, and that kind of links back to the community engagement piece earlier in terms of, leveraging the great inclusive and diversity that we do have in the region, and not from a political standpoint, but much more from a fact that the diasporas are connected abroad, particularly in a number of the Commonwealth countries. So how do we make sure we've got the ecosystem that's supporting that engagement? And I think, it does lead on to, I guess, my other area of question for you all, which is your views on how do we make sure there's a connected ecosystem in the region. There are a lot of players in the region all doing great things, and so from experiences of 2014, how did you make sure that all these ecosystems were coming together, whether it be LEPs, chambers, retail associations, large organizations, etc.? How did you make sure that there was one unified voice, I suppose, in terms of the opportunity of the games in the region at the time?
Well, I can kick off on that. I suppose we didn't use the games to create those structures of engagement between business, academic, and government life. Those were already there. Those had been there for some years. We had restructured them after the financial crisis of 2008-9, had formed a couple of new, well, certainly one particular new body called the Glasgow Economic Leadership Board, which pulled together academic, industrial, senior industrial, and governmental, both national and local governmental representations. So there was nothing particularly novel that we had to do for the Commonwealth Games to achieve that. So I would hope that the impetus for making that happen doesn't depend on the Commonwealth Games. That would be my main point. Peter might have something else to say on that from his perspective. Likewise, Anne.
Sure, yeah, as Stuart said, the networks already existed in Glasgow, and I think it's one of the great strengths of Glasgow and has been part of our success, particularly in terms of attracting international conferences. The extent to which Glasgow is joined up between the universities, between City Council, City Marketing Bureau, and businesses as well, who understand the value of these events coming into the city and what those connections can bring. Activities at the SEC, for example, contribute well over £1 million a day into Glasgow in terms of net economic benefit. So I think the fact that everybody gets that means working together has become the norm, and that makes the city very easy for outside parties to come in and participate in many senses, whether that's inward investment, whether that's event organisers, or whether that's any developers coming into the city. I think the connections are there, and it's been a huge part of Glasgow's success.
So again, Peter, I'm assuming it's just keeping that communication going and leveraging what's already there and making sure there's a honest and transparent voice about what the future could look like together, and getting behind that in a unified sense. I mean, Anne, is there any thoughts from your perspective, from your experiences as well?
I think just really endorsing what Stuart and Peter have said there, the networks in Glasgow are very well formed, and there was no reinvention of the wheel. It was very much beefing up those networks and getting people to collaborate more within those, and probably getting more engagement from some people who maybe don't always come into those networks, but really just using the same framework. And what I would say is, even now after the games, that those networks still exist. So it wasn't like a new network was formed just for the games. It was very much, as both Peter and Stuart said, using what we've got and just continuing with that communication through that.
Absolutely fantastic. Absolutely concur with that. And I know there are already networks in the region of some of those key bodies already, and some great work has been done. But I guess it's just making sure that it becomes the foundation for an evolved network of that kind post the games. Because I guess that kind of leads into the next session that I like to talk about, which is about the legacy of the games. You know, and I guess it's a broad general question to you all, really. So feel free to pick it up from whatever angle you're thinking of. The question is simply, what do you believe the legacy of the games will be, from your perspective and from your positions? Because the legacy is such a broad term, depending on who you are and how you're approaching that, whether you're a small business, whether you're a large organization, whether you're a public sector organization, or just an entrepreneur who just wants to see how you can get the best out of this. So what does the legacy of the games mean to you?
Okay, again, I can kick off a little. Certainly, we've mentioned this before. There's a legacy in for individual companies that have never been involved in the international world event circus that travels around the globe every year, and so there are some companies that get onto that conveyor belt of pitching for deals in international events on the back of an event like the Commonwealth Games in the local area. So there is immediate legacy or clear legacy for those individual companies. There's also, there is a legacy for particular parts of your city. I certainly think that the legacy for Peter's whole area around the Scottish Events Campus, Peter will explain that in more detail, but I think for the east end of the city, as I mentioned before, where so much of the games activity took place, there are facilities in place now that are regularly used, and where I'm thinking of myself going to a couple of tennis matches, for example, the Davis Cup that subsequently were held. I'm assuming I will be doing the same for the World Cycling Championships when it's held in 2023, where you're going into an area of the city that you previously wouldn't have been. Now that will have implications for local businesses that they should be hopefully be able to plan for in the future. But equally, the legacy of the city's ability to participate in that international circus more regularly. So you're not using the Commonwealth Games as a one-off, you are using it. And I know Birmingham will be well prepared to do this, but constantly to pitch in for the next round of events as they came up. The European Championships in 2018 became, for Glasgow, almost as significant as the Commonwealth Games in terms of attracting tourists and business into the city. And then finally, there is, as I said, there's also the tourism implication, because again, you get a tourism bump out of a major event like the Commonwealth Games. It doesn't always last. You've got to try and build it. And that's why I think, you know, a legacy of major events subsequently planned for after the Commonwealth Games is how you're going to help retain that, because it could simply grow to a peak and then fade away after a few years. So it really has to be built on.
I think for me that's a crucial point, Stuart, is about planning the legacy in before the games or before the activity. And a couple of examples, infrastructure, Stuart touched on it earlier. The level of investment that went into the east end of Glasgow, it was already planned as to what the output of that was going to be post-games. It wasn't just a case of let's invest some money in the games and then we'll work out what to do with it afterwards. And I think the latter point that Stuart made was that the games wasn't seen as a one-off for Glasgow. It was part of a strategy. The games was a big component of that strategy, but it was about what follows. So it's how do we use the games before we'd even got into the games, knowing that we could use the games as leverage to attract other events in the future, and planning that series of events and bids for those events meant that we could exploit that opportunity of the games to best effect.
I appreciate that, Peter. And could I come to you in terms of your response to that question? What do you believe the legacy of the games? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think immediately post the games, the retail community saw quite a few programs that left a legacy. So the logistics side of it, security, joint working, accessibility as well. There's a lot of those smaller programs that they definitely were seen to collaborate and work together to deliver those. But probably the key legacy that I would say from the retail community, Peter touched on earlier about there was a bit of skepticism before the games. And what we saw was we turned that skepticism, and then people started to see, well, what are the opportunity of events forthcoming now? We've gone away from just saying, you know, that this is going to be a problem for us to actually saying, right, how can we get involved in it? And I think changing that attitude, it's a little bit more of an intangible legacy, but it's definitely there for the city to say, how can we best take advantage of these opportunities that come our way?
I appreciate that. Ian, yourself?
Yeah, I think I'd reiterate all of that. I think maybe just starting from a strategic perspective, Joel, and I think Glasgow definitely saw a lot of this, in particular working alongside the Marketing Bureau and the People Make Glasgow campaign. And there's just an overarching potential international change of perception about a city. And I think Birmingham, when we spoke to a lot of the residents across the region about what they wanted from the Games, it was that opportunity to showcase, show off what the city looks like now, how it's changed over the last 20 years, and really put it on the world spotlight. Now, you then have to measure what that means after it in terms of inward investment, tourism numbers and everything else. But I think that's a great opportunity. But actually, if you overlay that now with the fact this could be one of the first kind of post-pandemic multi-sport games, if you speak to the government, their narrative is now all around 2021 being the year of recovery, but 2022 being the year of celebration. So next year, with Queen's Jubilees, 100th anniversaries of the BBC, and actually Commonwealth Games right at the heart of it, I think there's a huge opportunity for Birmingham to be in the spotlight nationally as people get back together, stadiums are filled back up, and really the spotlight again is on the city. So I think in terms of businesses thinking about how they utilise that, you know, almost the moment in the spotlight and translate that into growth is a real challenge. And then rightly so, there's a lot of similarities with the games that we're trying to put on here in Glasgow in terms of, you know, there's a regeneration out at Perry Barn, what that can do for the region and how that can benefit local businesses similar to the East End of Glasgow, as we've heard. You know, there's also a huge amount, even in the space of, which we've not talked about much yet, sustainability. And, you know, there's huge aspirations, as we know, in the city in terms of the clean air zone and getting people away from private transport into public transport. And I think the Games can demonstrate how that can work. Similar to Glasgow, we'll force people out of cars, we'll incentivise them into public transport. But how do you make sure as a region that behaviour continues into the long term? So there's a lot of work going on with the combined authority and the city around what does that look like in terms of almost a sustainability legacy plan, and making sure behavioural change happens. So, and the list goes on, you know, there's health and well-being benefits, there's other trade benefits, but, you know, and I think that overarching increased confidence, change of perception of the region is hugely powerful and can have a knock-on effect on a lot of things.
I mean, that's a really great point you're making, and thank you all for your points. But just picking up on that point, Ian, in terms of that sustainability and that social point, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a question in the chat now which is basically asking, you know, is there a focus on addressing some of those social issues in the region through the hosting of the Games? And part of that question again is, are there smart objectives in relation to legacy? But I think it's a really valid question in terms of those social issues. You know, what did the Games do in 2014, and what do we believe the Games could do in 22 that really can support some of those social challenges within the regions? Whether that be job creation, whether that be support for local communities, social mobility, etc., etc. So just some general thoughts really on that. 2014, what was the social impact? And I guess 2022, what do you think the social impact could be?
Well, I kick off, Joel, on this one. I think we're very aware of the significant level of public funding in really challenging economic times that are going into the event. So perhaps more than ever, we're focused on how do we make sure that they bring around a real benefit and social change. So, you know, a lot of the opportunities that we've earmarked around the Games, whether they be some volunteering opportunities, the thousands of contractor opportunities, or some of the direct jobs, we're trying to align to something we're called the Commonwealth Jobs and Skills Academy, which is actually around making sure that we train those currently not in long-term employment or education through a programme well in advance of the Games and guarantee them an opportunity on the Games. So we've got a lot of suppliers signed up to support us in doing that. We've already earmarked a number of our own roles as well. So we anticipate there being thousands of people that we reach out to and ensure that they have that, maybe that first step on the CV, that links to longer term opportunities, and building an outplacement programme around that's critical to making sure that benefit lasts as well. So that's one example, but hugely important example for us in terms of how we can have hopefully a cohort of people who genuinely can say the games help support and kind of change their life for the better. But that's not easy, and I think we tried to do a bit of that in Glasgow, and actually the city probably did it better than the organising committee in terms of the volunteer workforce. But there's a huge aspiration here to do something perhaps on a bigger scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there's examples of, you know, you being involved in the ICLP program in the region here, Ian, which obviously the Chamber are a partner in as well, which is looking at that kind of BAME procurement and making sure the support gets back down to grassroots from that perspective. So absolutely. And I think the more examples that we can see in the region is the more we can keep pushing that out there to show the impact for all. Stuart, I know you were wanting to come in maybe.
I suppose there has to be a degree of realism in what can be achieved. There'll be a temptation to place everything on the shoulders of the Commonwealth Games. I mean, we're probably doing exactly the same just now with COP26. We have a tendency to put the whole arena of social and economic and particularly for our case, environmental issues in the back of COP26. There will inevitably be limits to what you can actually do with a major event, but I do think the volunteering programme is one of the most dramatic scale opportunities to have an impact on engagement around social issues. I'm not going to say that Glasgow absolutely cracked that. I do also think that this message about putting on cultural festivals alongside the sporting festivals is a really important way, again, of getting access to folks for whom sport is meaningless, who are really not interested. So to spread the experience by giving a kind of cultural spin to the whole event I think is important. But just as I say, that key message: don't overload the games with too many expectations of what you can seriously do. It goes back to the notion that it is a one-off event. It has a couple of weeks impact on a city, in terms of the real razzmatazz of the event. But and it can perhaps catalyze a few things, but it can't be everything.
No, I totally concur with that, and I think the cultural piece is really important. We've got a great event, I believe tomorrow, looking at cultural exchanges and how that really plays a part with the Commonwealth opportunity. But you're absolutely right. It's not all in the games' bag to deal with.
Yeah.
I think what the games does is provide a catalyst for us all to be more together in terms of what we all bring to the table. It's funny, I was having a conversation with a business just last week regarding this, and what we had to be really, really clear with that business on was that this is not a begging bowl scenario. It's not about coming to the games and saying, what can you give me? It's almost about, well, it's probably more about, here's what I can give you, and there's an opportunity for me to be able to give you that. Whether you're a small business that's doing something locally in a local community, whether you're a large organization that can really scale up the value, it is about that sense of collaboration and partnership. And I would implore businesses to adopt that type of mindset when looking for opportunities from the games. It's what can I give as well as what can I get? It has to be a two-way partnership approach in order for everyone to get the impact. Pete, I know you might have had something to say as well.
Yeah, just a couple of points to pick up there. Firstly, on the sustainability piece that Ian raised in terms of the shift that was created in terms of the way people moved around the city during the games was an opportunity I felt was missed not to capitalise on that. Everything went back to normal after it. And I think the city had prepared itself well, it had dressed itself well, it had put wayfinding in place to allow people to move around the city easily. Obviously, free public transport helped significantly in creating that modal shift, but perhaps there could have been other things that were done post games to build on that and to maximise that opportunity. And again, the same thing applied, I guess, to the volunteer programme, which both for London 2012 was hugely successful, and in Glasgow in terms of an engagement piece with the wider community in terms of building civic pride. And again, it just sort of dissipated after the games. I'm not sure how you build on that or capture it, but certainly those were opportunities that I felt we should perhaps have looked harder at how we could have maximised in the longer term.
I appreciate that. Well, we're getting towards the kind of the final furlong with today's event, and I think what we've really captured well, and I hope the audience have caught well, is the fact that, you know, this opportunity is a great one for all, but it's going to take input from all, and it's going to take a sense of collaboration from all in order to realise the value for all. And it's going to take a lot of businesses needing to come out of their comfort zone to some degree to be able to realise the opportunities of the games for themselves, but also in a way that enables them to contribute back to their own business community. Some sectors are going to be well hit and have been well hit, and recovery might take even longer, even post the games. But I think what's very clear is that the opportunity is from now. It's not in 2022. The opportunity is right here today to get involved and to start seeing how you could add that value and how you could benefit from the games in return. I just wanted to move slightly left to the academic sector. There's a couple of questions and a couple of views in the chat in regards to the input from the academic sector. Again, a general question to those involved in 2014, but what role did the academic sector play within the games, and what role do we feel that they could play moving forward? I mean, an interesting view from the academic space could be around the research around the games, some of the data that might come out from the games. How could that be used to inform, you know, as Stuart said earlier, you know, propositions for future games and activities to be involved in as an evidence base of impact, for example. But just generally, what are your thoughts on the role of the academic sector in the games?
Like kick off, Joel. So I think there's huge opportunities in Birmingham, and they're already starting to be realised. So the University of Birmingham, for example, has actually come on as a sponsor of the games, which is probably the first time in the UK that a university's come on and taken that close an association, and they're also one of our village sites. So we're doing a huge amount with them in terms of the kind of physical side of just hosting the athletes and all the opportunities that brings, right through to research and the legacy, as you say, narrative and how they can collect the data around that. There's some projects already ongoing around sustainability. We're talking to a couple of the other universities in the city about the creative side, the design side, the cultural sector, and there's a lot, I'm sure, that will come out of that. There's commercial opportunities in terms of training facilities and in relation to the likes of student accommodation, which will be no doubt required by a huge number of stakeholders around the games. And then there will be a games learning programme, which is perhaps a bit more school focused than university focused, but we will probably start that in advance of the next academic school year. We're looking to engage every school child in the region and talk about the games, talk about the travel, for example, that's related to the Queen's Baton Relay, to learn about all the Commonwealth countries. And also there's a whole piece there around the history of the Commonwealth as well, and having some open and honest conversations about the good, bad and indifferent around all of that. So that's quite an exciting opportunity, actually. But yeah, there's huge amounts, and if someone's asking from a specific university perspective, then by all means get in touch with us and we can follow anything up if anyone's got ideas. But a lot of conversations are already underway.
Appreciate that. Others on the call in terms of the academic input, what was your experiences from 2014?
Again, I suppose the most significant one that I noticed was the extent to which the academic community told the story of the economic, social and environmental impact of the games, and how what lessons we would learn from that. Actively engaged very early on in the whole process of the Commonwealth Games, and then subsequently producing one of the most comprehensive evaluation studies that I think I've ever seen, and a huge benefit to the city in understanding what was real and what wasn't. What stories were we telling ourselves because they sounded nice but actually hadn't really translated into to genuine impact. So it was a warts and all assessment, and it was properly planned out from the very beginning of the process. So I noticed that, as I thought that was hugely important.
Yeah, interesting. I think absolutely right. The you know, once you take off, you know, the jacket of the games, ultimately what really happened, what really worked, and more importantly, what didn't work, and what can we learn from that to inform what we're doing for the future, I think is vitally important. And Peter, I don't know if you had any thoughts as well on the academic input from your experiences?
Not particularly for me on the academic side. I think Stuart summed it up pretty well there.
Brilliant. And thank you for that one.
Yeah, just two inputs from my point of view. Stuart said about the research element of it. We were involved with footfall modelling and trends and understanding how the city worked in a major event time, and gathering in that data from the retail community and trying to use models for that. So that was really quite interesting to give us an insight into that. And then on the other side, it was the skills and training and looking at what skills were needed for employers in the city and how colleges, etc., could get involved in it. And that was our main input with the academic side.
I mean, thanks for that input, Anna, and you're absolutely right. I think that skills piece with the education sector is going to be really, really important. Slightly going back to what Ian talked about in terms of the volunteer opportunities and the Commonwealth Jobs and Skills Academy, I think there's a real important part to play more than ever before for the academic institutions to almost leverage and translate and interpret the games into practical long-term opportunities for the next generation of young people, whether they are future employees or even future business owners. It's just making sure that they are part of the thinking, and I know they are, but part of the thinking and a sustainable activity for the future on the back of the games. I think that's crucially important. I think one of the other things that would be great to see, and I believe it's happening, but definitely would be great to see come 2022, is the way in which academia and the worlds of businesses and the way the worlds of communities are much more aligned and much more connected as a whole, because there's a global narrative here in terms of why the region, similar to the messaging that Glasgow would have had as why Glasgow. There's a global narrative of why the Midlands, not just Birmingham, but why the Midlands. And I think that's something that those three sectors crucially are all part of in terms of a holistic approach to answering that question. We've got roughly about eight minutes or so before we sum up. One of the final areas that has come from businesses has been, and we touched on it a little bit in terms of that kind of youth and skills agenda, but one of the questions coming up from business is how can they upskill themselves with businesses to not only take the opportunities that are being provided through the games now, but also to be much more stronger for the future. So, how do businesses scale up themselves to be able to take advantage of some of those opportunities now, but in a way that gives them a great foundation for the future? So slightly bit of a disjointed question, but it is about now, but it is also about the future, making sure businesses are investing in their future selves. So how do they do that?
Shall I maybe start off? I guess we were involved in a whole host of an enormous series of events that were run, demonstrating what the opportunities were for procurement. But alongside that, we were running procurement training programs that directly aimed at businesses that had never made a pitch into an event of this nature. And again, the whole thrust of that was to say, yep, this is your first pitch into can be a highly competitive environment with a lot of international interest and a lot of interest from competitors all across the UK in the context of Birmingham. So what is it that's going to help you get across the line? And then what do you do to ensure that that's not your one and only success, that you build on that to be able to make similar approaches? Of course, the question will be, do you actually want to be in this long term, or are you just seeing it as a one-off? Because I think the level of preparation to really succeed in it will only pay off if you're going to be getting similar kinds of business or business that's related to this in the long run. So make that judgment. But I would be hoping, and Ian, I'm sure, will be able to tell us what support infrastructure is in place in Birmingham in the way that we were doing it in Glasgow to help companies do the preparations. That's the only way that we managed to get 3/4 of the economic impact at the local level. That's why 3/4 of the contracts ended up with Scottish companies. So that's what I would be looking out for if I was a business interested in engaging in the games.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, Ian, any thoughts from your perspective? I know there's thoughts on, there's going to be a Commonwealth Business Expo and trade show activity and things like that around the games. But any other thoughts on that? How do businesses scale up themselves for these opportunities?
Yeah, I think Stuart's points are very relevant there in terms of, there are certain sectors that lend themselves to the events industry potentially being a long-term growth area. But Stuart's right, that requires investment, getting expertise involved, and really lining that to your strategy for the business going forward. There's some technology companies we talked about earlier that are good examples of those, and perhaps some in the kind of temporary infrastructure or power space. And then there will be other businesses who just see this as an opportunity because there are huge numbers of people coming into the city and a large investment of public money that, some of that should be flowing back, and rightly so, to the local business community. And that's probably more around, Joe, what we talked about earlier in terms of those networks and understanding how they can link in with other companies, how they can understand what's going on in the region that's perhaps not just directly involved in the games. So someone had mentioned, I think in the chat I saw earlier, about catering opportunities. The games catering opportunities that we'll procure are primarily big in-venue catering opportunities that traditionally would already be serviced by existing big caterers, right? However, there'll be a huge number of live sites, there'll be a huge number of festival-related activities that will be put on by every local authority in the West Midlands. So finding out around your area what the local authorities' plans are for your patch, if you can support some of that activity, which should be opportunities for smaller type catering businesses, then I would very much push around finding out what is going on in that space, and that applies to a number of contracts as well. You'll know, Joe, because you and I have been involved. There has already been a number of opportunities for businesses to come along and find out how to do public procurement generally, which is not easy. It's not easy from a tenderer side. I'm not a huge fan of it myself, but we all have to abide by the rules. So actually, that does leave a legacy. We've always said that we can't guarantee anybody working the games, but if you go through one of these programs, which I know the Chamber will continue to work with us on, then at least it puts you in a position that you can pitch for future public sector work as well, even if it's not in the games. And then as a service industry, as we talked about earlier, it's getting ready for just a huge influx of people into the region, and how you build your business on the back of that and promote it going forward in terms of what the games has brought. So whether you're a pub or restaurant in the retail sector, there should be that bounce and being ready for that. And as Anne introduced, how do you work through all the practical challenges that will be around that, but actually build a business on the back of it?
I appreciate that. No, absolutely, really good advice there. Anne, Peter, any final thoughts on that question from yourselves?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's just about, how do you make the opportunity part of your overall strategy, as opposed to, you need to have a strategy beyond the games. And I think trying to build a business strategy just around the games would be fundamentally flawed. It might provide a stepping stone, whether that's in terms of brand awareness. If you're an upcoming brand, you can find a route into the games to reach an audience that creates awareness, that allows you to build your brand from there. But that's just using it as an opportunity as part of a wider strategy.
No, that's brilliant. Absolutely right. And Anne?
Yeah, I think as Ian alluded to there, from the service sector and the retail sector point of view, it's not necessarily about winning the business that comes with the games. It's about preparing for when the games are there, and really upskilling your teams. And I think from the retail sector, what we were seeing was upskilling in logistics and planning, upskilling in customer experience, creativity and marketing, but not just for the games. What there really was a willingness to say, well, this is something that then becomes a game changer. So we don't just do it for the event of the games. Let's actually make this into our best self and take that forward and beyond the games and deliver for Glasgow beyond that.
That's absolutely. No, thank you very much for that. But look, I just want to say thank you all for your time this morning. as we know, the Commonwealth Games itself is a constantly moving beast. There's always things happening. There's always updates to be made. So I think your knowledge of 2014 and then obviously Ian and thoughts around 2022, I think there's a real great alignment in terms of the foundations from those times and obviously other games previously, but the learning from those time in 2014 to now, I think that's been really, really great and seen there's a real synergy in that. So thank you all for your time. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Ian, Peter, and Anne. So just in summing up, what I like to do is just maybe just give some last minute thoughts, really, I guess, on what I've heard today. I think going back to the structure of today around that preparation, the process, and the impact of the games, I think what's very, very clear from the preparation piece is that it's about preparing as creatively as possible. There isn't a one way of being involved in the games. There are multiple routes in, but it depends upon what is it that you want to get from the games. So if it's a quick flash in the pan opportunity, there's nothing wrong with that, but you've got to prepare for your business for that. But if it's about, on what I would argue is the better way, which is that long-term sustainability, and as Peter described earlier, that kind of, it's a stepping stone to a longer term strategy, then it's about thinking creatively about what that looks like from now. What networks do you need to be in now? What type of information do you need to be getting on a regular basis? Who do you start partnering with from now in order to make sure your preparations are as solid and as possible to meet your objectives from your involvement in the games? Which again leads into the process of which Ian talked about and Anne started with in terms of the kind of city process, security, logistics, transport, travel, footfall, all of those kind of processes that are often being worked on in the background. How are you, what's your awareness of that as a business and how are you linking that into your own strategy of being involved? Ian made a good point regarding the local authorities and understanding their plans as well, because the fallout of the games will also lead into activities through local authorities and other organizations too. So how do you become part of the ecosystem of the games, not just focused on just the Commonwealth Games as a centerpiece alone? How do you be part of the wider impact of the games? And then Peter really talked about, the real impact of how his organization benefited, but lessons and learning for other businesses too, regardless of size, whether it's the commercial benefit, but the strategic benefit more importantly, and how the leverage piece can really add value to your business on a longer term. Ian talked about the sustainability piece and the social impact and how that is absolutely written into the actual delivery of the games. But it's also a responsibility for organizations themselves to see what they can do in order to continue that sustainability and that social legacy of the games. And I think the overarching question that I like to ask the audience, not the panelists, but the audience is, what do you actually want from the games yourself? And it's not necessarily a question to answer in this session, but it's being honest about what do you want, because what you want is going to dictate your approach. And it's going to dictate your method. It's going to dictate who you'd speak to, the networks you get involved in. So be honest and true about what you want for the games is such an important question for me. So thank you again to all our panelists for your time this morning. For those who are on the call, this is a start of a great week of events through the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce, part of the Greater Birmingham Chamber of Commerce. Great number of events coming through this week. Key highlights really are Thursday. There's going to be, Thursday's our networking and main conference day. It's going to be a great opportunity for you to interact with businesses from right across the Commonwealth, asking those questions, building those partnerships, but also hearing from a number of different countries on how you can benefit from trading and indeed how to begin the process of trading with businesses in those countries. Tomorrow, we've got the cultural exchange, as mentioned earlier, going back to Stuart's point of that cultural aspect. So a great opportunity to learn about how culture is part of the games and how it can be leveraged in a positive and honest and transparent manner to create long-term change. I believe on Wednesday, we've got South Africa and Singapore as well, talking about how to trade with them, but also talking about other types of sports that are coming along, big sporting events that you can be involved in as well as the impact of the technology space in Singapore, for example, and how you can be involved there. So a whole myriad of things happening this week. It's going to be a fantastic week. It's all for free. So still opportunities to sign up if you haven't yet, and look forward to seeing you during the rest of this week. So thank you again to Peter and Ian and Stuart. Thank you all who have been on the call as part of this webinar today, and wish you the best of luck for your businesses.